The blaster bolt screamed past my head so close that I felt the heat brush against my ear before it slammed into the bulkhead behind me. Molten metal sprayed across Corridor 7, leaving a smoking black crater exactly where my skull had been a heartbeat earlier. Somehow, I didn't flinch. I didn't dive for cover. I just stood frozen in the doorway, my pulse pounding so violently it echoed in my ears, unable to tear my eyes away from the scorched mark that should have been my grave. Then the station's emergency alarms erupted. Red warning lights flooded the corridor as the deafening sirens drowned out every other sound. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't an accident, and it was only the beginning. My name is Aaliyah Vance. I'm 26 years old, 5 feet 11 inches tall, and until 30 seconds ago, I thought today was going to be painfully ordinary. I couldn't have been more wrong, and until approximately 40 seconds before that bolt nearly ended my life, I had been having what I considered a perfectly average Tuesday on board Kellery, Diplomatic Station Ring 2. Average meaning boring. Average meaning invisible. Average meaning exactly the kind of day I had been quietly engineering for myself since the moment I arrived at this posting 3 weeks earlier. I had not wanted this assignment. Nobody wanted this assignment. The Kelvari Diplomatic Annex was the kind of place the Galactic Compact sent human personnel when it needed to say it was making progress on cross-species relations without actually risking anything important. The station was beautiful in the way that things built by species who do not value human life tend to be beautiful, cold, precise, and designed with proportions that made humans feel like children who had wandered into the wrong building. The ceilings were 16 feet high. The corridors were lit with a pale violet glow that gave everything the look of a dream you couldn't quite hold on to. The air was kept 3 degrees cooler than humans preferred, and every door handle was placed at exactly the wrong height for human hands. I had taken the posting because Captain Alan Drew had called me into his office, on Luna Station, looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Vance, you speak Vihari. We need a warm body in that annex. Say yes, and I'll make sure your service record reflects it favorably." He had not said what it would reflect favorably for. I had said yes anyway, because I was 26, and optimistic in the way that people are optimistic before they understand how institutional favors actually work. I had learned Vihari in my second year of the diplomatic track, under a professor named Dr. Clive Morton, who had the best vocabulary in the linguistics department and the worst coffee in the entire university. I had studied it because the language was famously difficult, and I liked difficult things. I had not studied it because I expected to end up stationed inside the personal residence ring of an imperial Kell of Harry Empress, with a blaster burned 2 in from my ear, and yet the alarms cut off as suddenly as they had started. The station had a way of doing that. Going from screaming chaos to dead silence in the span of a breath, as if the architecture itself was reminding you that order was always one command away. I peeled my back off the doorframe. My hands were not shaking. I was fairly proud of that given the circumstances. "Station breach confirmed in Sector 4, the intercom announced in Vasheri. Then a half-second later, the same message in the Galactic Standard dialect that humans used. "All non-essential personnel are directed to return to quarters. All essential personnel are directed to their emergency stations immediately." I was essential personnel barely but officially. I checked my sidearm, standard issue compact model, charged, holstered, and I started moving down Corridor 7 at a pace that was faster than walking, but slower than running, which is the pace you use when you want to look calm. But you are not actually calm. The first person I ran into was Corporal Nidfinch, another human guard who was coming from the Vopset direction with the expression of a man who has just remembered that he signed a contract. "Vance," he said, slightly breathless. "Sector 4. You hear it?" "I heard it from inside it," I said. "Nearly bought a wall." Ned looked at the scorched mark on the wall behind me. He had been in the Corps for 4 years longer than me. He had a kind of calm that came not from courage, but from having been frightened so many times that the process had become familiar. He looked at the burn mark, then back at me, then at the burn mark again. "2 in," he said. "Give or take." "Right." He straightened his jacket. "Imperial Wing is on lockdown. Lord Commander Velen has invoked Protocol 7, which means the inner guard is active, and we are technically not supposed to be within 200 meters of the Empress's residential quarter. And yet here we are," I said. "Inside 200 meters. And yet here we are." Ned agreed. This was the thing about being a human guard on a Kelhari station. The protocol books were enormous. There were rules for every conceivable situation written over centuries of Kelavari military tradition, and they were elegant and thorough, and completely unsuited to the kind of fast, ugly, improvised chaos that tended to happen in actual emergencies. The inner guard would be moving in formal response patterns right now, checking clearances, waiting for authorization chains to complete. It was impressive in the way that a very beautiful machine is impressive just before it fails to stop something small and fast. I had been a guard for 3 years. I had served on 2 other stations, one deep space relay post, and a brief and deeply unpleasant month on a border checkpoint near the Cygnus Belt. I was not a hero. I was not especially brave. What I was reliably, and without much effort, was observant. I noticed things. It was a habit I had picked up early, partly because I was quiet by nature, and partly because in any room where you are the least powerful person present, watching carefully is the most useful skill you can develop, which was why 3 weeks into this posting, I had already memorized every maintenance corridor, emergency junction, and secondary exit on this residential ring. Not because I expected trouble, because I was nervous. And memorizing floor plans is what I do when I am nervous. The breaches in Sector 4, I said slowly. That's the external maintenance level. They're not in the residential quarter yet, Neds. Yet, I agreed. But Sector 4 connects to the secondary utility passage on Level 6, and Level 6 runs parallel to the Empress's private gallery corridor. I paused. Does Vulcan know that? Ned looked at me. Does Van know the maintenance layout of a level that Kalari officers do not personally inspect? We both knew the answer to that. I'll go right. I said you go back to the security post and tell Velon about the Level 6 connection. Use the formal address. Use your best Vihari, and do not look him in the eye for more than 1 second, or he will spend 10 minutes reminding you of protocol instead of listening. Ned opened his mouth, then closed it, then said, Vance, if this goes wrong, it goes wrong, I said. But if nobody checks that passage and something happens, I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. Ned went right, I went left, toward the gallery corridor, moving fast now, and not worrying about whether I looked calm. The gallery corridor was exactly what it sounded like. A long, high-ceiling passage lined with display cases, holding artifacts from a dozen conquered or allied civilizations. Under normal light, it was the kind of corridor that made you feel like you were walking through the memory of a species that had been collecting power for a very long time. Under emergency lighting, with the violet glow replaced by the flat red of the alert strips, it looked like the inside of something that had already decided to swallow you. I had my sidearm out. I reached the end of the gallery in 40 seconds and stopped at the junction where the corridor branched. To the left was the sealed door to the Empress's private garden. To the right was the utility passage entrance. Straight ahead was the main access to her residential suite. The utility passage door was not sealed. It was open by about 3 centimeters. That door was supposed to be magnetically locked from both sides. It required a Level 5 clearance code to open from either direction. It had been open for long enough that the auto-seal mechanism had logged a fault, which meant someone had disabled the fault logging before they opened it. This was not a random breach. I pressed my back against the wall beside the door. I steadied my breathing. I thought in a very clear and specific way about how much I did not want to be here. Then I pushed the door open with my foot and moved through it fast and low, keeping to the right side of the passage. The utility passage was narrow, lit by service lights, and smelled of the recycled air scent that all station maintenance corridors share, regardless of what species built them. It ran for about 30 meters before it opened into a junction that connected back to the residential corridor from the inside. There was a man in the passage. He was not Kelavari. He was not human. He was something between the two in height, gray-skinned, wearing civilian clothes over what was clearly light body armor, and he was moving very quietly toward the junction with a compact energy weapon in one hand and a device in the other that I recognized as a dorsal disruptor. He had not heard me. I had approximately 1 second to make a decision. I had trained for this. Every guard in the compact had trained for this. The training said, identify challenge, give 1 warning, then act. The training had been written by people who designed training programs and had never been alone in a dark maintenance corridor with 1 second. I closed the distance fast and quiet and brought the butt of my sidearm down on his wrist. The weapon clattered. He turned. I already had him off balance, and I kept him that way. putting him against the wall with my forearm across his chest and my sidearm level at his jaw. "Don't," I said in Vori, then in the gray-skinned species' own tongue, which I did not speak. "So said" was technically the word for stop, from a phrase I had heard once and stored in the back of my memory, the way I store everything. He went still. I used the seal disruptor from his hand to lock the utility passage door from the inside. I kicked his weapon back toward the entrance, where he couldn't reach it. Then I used the passage comm panel to relay his location to the security post and kept him pinned to the wall, breathing, while the station shook itself back into order around me. It took 11 minutes for the Kelvari inner guard to reach my position. 11 minutes is a very long time to stand in a maintenance corridor pressing a man against a wall. My arm was burning, my pulse was up. I was thinking with absolute sincerity about how badly I wanted a cup of coffee. Lord Commander Velen arrived with 6 armed guards and looked at me with the expression that high-ranking Kel of officials tended to use when confronted with something they found categorically unexpected. It was not quite contempt. It was not quite surprise. It was something in between, like a professor who has just found an insect solving a mathematics problem. "You are the human guard," he said in Vari, as if this clarified something. "Yes, sir," I said, also in Vari. He looked at the man I was holding. He looked at the locked utility door. He looked at the seal disruptor I had repurposed. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he said in Galactic Standard, presumably so I would understand clearly, "The Empress will be informed." I opened my mouth to say that it was only my job, and that I was sure the inner guard would have found the passage shortly anyway. Then I closed it, because none of that was true, and Velian knew it, and I knew it, and that there was no graceful way to fill the silence. "Yes, sir," said again. He took custody of the intruder. His guards cleared the passage. I holstered my sidearm. I walked back out into the gallery corridor, where the red emergency lighting was already cycling down to the standard violet. The display cases stood in their rows. The artifacts inside them were old and quiet, and indifferent to everything that had just happened. I had been on this station for 22 days. I had been planning to spend every one of them being invisible. I already had the feeling, standing there under the returning glow of a Kavari corridor in a ring, that humans were merely tolerated to enter, that my plan was beginning to fail in ways I had not accounted for. I was right. I just didn't know yet how completely nobody executed me. I want to say that plainly, because for the better part of 48 hours after the maintenance corridor incident, I was genuinely uncertain about the outcome. Kelvari protocol around the Empress's residential quarter was not ambiguous. Unauthorized entry without a direct order from the Lord Commander was a Level 4 violation. The fact that I had unauthorized entry with a legitimate tactical reason did not automatically clear the violation. It just added paperwork. Velian filed the report. I filed a counter-report in Vari, which surprised him enough that he read the whole thing. The Annex's human liaison officer, a tired man named Lieutenant Colonel Grant Hobbs, who had been running diplomatic postings for 16 years, and had the look of someone who had long since made peace with confusion, sat across from me in his small office and said, "Vance, do you understand what you did?" "I apprehended a threat in an unsecured passage," I said. "You entered the Empress's residential zone without authorization and subdued an armed intruder 17 meters from her private garden." Hobbs said, "Those two descriptions are both accurate and completely different in meaning, depending on which side of the desk you're sitting on." "Which side are you sitting on, sir?" Hobbs looked at me for a moment, then he said, "The compact is not filing charges. Sean is not filing charges. You are being issued a formal notation of commendation and a formal notation of protocol breach simultaneously, which is apparently a thing that can happen on Kelhari stations. You will be returned to regular duty starting tomorrow morning. And Vance," he leaned forward slightly, "try very hard to be boring for a while." I said, "Yes, sir." I meant it. I was boring for exactly 3 days. On the 4th day, I was assigned to the outer gallery corridor for the standard morning watch, which ran from 6 to noon in station time. The gallery corridor was considered a light posting. The display cases didn't require supervision. The only real duty was standing at the junction point at the far end and logging anyone who passed through. The Empress used the gallery occasionally on her way to the council wing, but her schedule was managed by a senior attendant named Kurft, and the morning watch almost never overlapped with her movements almost. I was at the junction at 8, standing in the way that guards are trained to stand. which is upright and present, but not rigid, watchful, but not obviously watching. When I heard the sound of footsteps from the residential end of the corridor, not the quick, purposeful steps of attendants, slower, deliberate, the kind of steps that don't rush because the person making them has never had to, I did not turn my head. I logged the entry in my wrist panel and kept my eyes at a neutral forward angle, which is the correct position for a guard when Imperial family members pass. She moved through the gallery like something out of the wrong category of experience. I had seen her once before 3 weeks ago, through a corridor window for about 4 seconds. That had been enough to understand why the Caliph called her the Eternal Flame. It was not just her appearance, though the Caliphi were tall and built on lines that made humans look approximate by comparison, and she wore her rank the way certain people wear their own skin. Without effort, without thought, as if it had never occurred to her that it could be any other way, it was the quality of her attention. Even passing through a gallery corridor alone at 8 o'clock in the morning, she gave the impression of someone whose notice, if it landed on you, would rearrange the structure of your day. She was passing the 4th display case when I made my mistake. It was not a dramatic mistake. I didn't speak out of turn, or step forward, or do anything a person watching from the outside would have noticed. What I did was look at her directly, for just over 3 seconds. In Kell of Harry culture, eye contact from a subordinate to a member of the Imperial family is governed by a precise set of rules. A glance of 1 second or less is acceptable, and in fact required as an acknowledgement of presence. Anything beyond 1 second, depending on duration and context, moves through a spectrum from impertinence to insult to open challenge. 3 seconds is firmly in the insult range. Knew this. I had read the protocol manual twice in the cultural supplementary guide once. I knew exactly what 3 seconds meant. What happened was simple. She glanced at me as she passed. The way she would glance at any guard, brief and impersonal, and something in the way she moved shifted for just a fraction of a moment. Some quality of posture or pace that my brain flagged as unusual, without being able to immediately name why I was trying to identify it. And because I was trying to identify it, I was still looking when I should have dropped my gaze. She noticed. I felt it the way you feel when a room temperature changes. Not dramatically, not all at once, but unmistakably. She did not slow down. She did not speak. She turned her head very slightly in my direction, and I had exactly long enough to see her eyes, which were the deep amber color that highborn Kelavari were known for, with the elongated dark pupil that did not look like anything human, before I dropped my gaze to the floor and stood very still and waited to find out what happened next. What happened was nothing. She walked past the junction and out toward the council wing, and the sound of her steps faded, and the gallery went quiet, and I stood there for a full minute before I was confident my expression was back under control. Ned Finch came by at the end of the watch. I had not moved from the junction. "You look like a man who narrowly avoided something," he said. "Empress came through the gallery," I said. Did tilted his head and intra, and I made eye contact for approximately 3 seconds. It stared at me. "Vance, I know. 3 seconds. I know. I know what it is. Ned, I was there." Ned looked down the corridor in the direction she had gone. Then he looked back at me and nothing happened. She walked past. I said Ned was quiet for a moment. Then he said quietly, "She's never just walked past before. There was a maintenance worker last year who made eye contact for about half that long and spent 3 days in formal review." I did not find this reassuring, but nothing official came. No summons, no notation. The day ended. The next day began. I was assigned to the outer gallery again, which was either a coincidence or it wasn't, and I decided not to examine the question too carefully. She came through the gallery the next morning as well. This time I kept my eyes precisely level, exactly as protocol required, and I was very deliberate about it. I logged the entry. I stood correctly. I was a model guard and a model representation of human professionalism. In a kell of posting, she slowed down. Not obviously. Not in a way that anyone else would have noticed if anyone else had been there. She simply moved at about 80% of her previous pace. As she passed the 4th display case, she did not look at me. She did not speak. After a moment, she returned to her normal pace and continued toward the council wing. I stared at the wall for a very long time after she left. On the 3rd morning, she arrived earlier, 6:58 station time, which meant she had come through before the previous watch had fully cleared, and I had barely taken my position. I heard the footsteps and stood straight, and did everything correctly. Gaze forward, hands neutral, posture appropriate. She stopped right at the junction. 2 meters away from me, she stopped and looked at one of the display cases on the left wall, the one containing a ceremonial headdress from the Marvel Confederation, a species that had been absorbed into the Kalari Empire about 3 centuries ago. She studied it with what appeared to be genuine interest, though I would later learn she had walked past that case approximately 900 times and had commissioned its display herself. She was not looking at the headdress. Her senior attendant, Kurth, was standing 6 paces behind her and looking at me with an expression I could not fully read, but which I interpreted as cautionary. I stood still. I did not speak. This was correct. A guard does not initiate conversation with Imperial family members under any circumstances short of an emergency, she said in Vihari without turning. You are the human who secured the passage. It was not a question. I answered it anyway, because leaving an Imperial statement unanswered was worse than answering incorrectly. Yes, Eminence, I said, in Vari, with the formal address. My accent was not perfect. It was functional. She turned then, not fully, just enough to place me in her direct sightline. She looked at me with that amber gaze for a long moment that felt considerably longer than it actually was. You speak, Vari, she said. A little, Eminence. A little, she repeated. There was something in the way she said it. Not quite amusement, not quite skepticism. Something that was sitting exactly between the two, weighing them. She looked at the headdress again. The Marvel made this for a funeral. The original owner died in a challenge she won. The Kell of Harari tradition holds that winning a challenge you die in is a higher honor than surviving. 1. She paused. Your species has a phrase for something similar. What is it? I thought for a moment. Pyrrhic victory, I said, though the human understanding of it is less admiring. She looked at me again. This time it was longer and different in quality, not the testing look from a moment ago. Something more like the expression a person has when a door they expected to be locked turns out to be open. Pyrrhic, she said in careful galactic standard. From your ancient historical record, yes, Eminence. A general who won every battle and lost the war because of it. We have a similar record, she said. We called him Valkith the Brilliant. She said it. The way you say the name of someone you have complicated feelings about. He's celebrated. The human version is a cautionary tale. I said the silence that followed was about 4 seconds long. It felt significant in a way I could not have explained. Then she walked on. Kerr gave me one last look as he passed. His expression had changed. I couldn't name what it had changed to, but it was definitely different from cautionary. Over the following 2 weeks, she came through the gallery 9 times during my watch. She was not always scheduled in the gallery during my assigned hours. I was beginning to understand that my assigned hours and the gallery were being quietly coordinated. I did not know how to prove this. I did not try to prove it. I just showed up and stood at the junction and tried to be professionally invisible, which was becoming progressively harder. On the 6th visit, she paused at the junction and asked me, still without looking directly at me, why humans use the concept of luck so frequently when their outcomes were clearly the result of preparation and action. I thought about this seriously before answering. Because if we admit it was preparation, I said, then we have to accept responsibility for when the preparation fails. She was quiet for a moment. Then she walked on. On the 8th visit, one of her attendants, a young Kohavari called Selna, who spoke very fast and seemed to find humans faintly entertaining, addressed me directly in Vihari, with a phrase that was meant to be mildly dismissive, the kind of thing a high-ranking attendant might say to a human guard, assuming the human wouldn't catch the layers in it. The phrase translated roughly as, "Does the small post sentinel also have opinions on matters above his ceiling?" I replied in Vihari, using the courtly register, which is a level above formal and a level below ceremonial. The small post sentinel has opinions on everything below his ceiling, which from his current elevation appears to include quite a lot. Tella went very still. The Empress stopped walking. She stood with her back to me for a moment. Then she made a sound that I did not recognize, and that Kurvith behind her clearly did recognize, because his carefully controlled expression shifted into something that looked like genuine surprise. She had laughed. It was quiet and brief, and she recovered it almost immediately. And when she turned and walked on, her face was composed. but Selma kept looking at me sideways for the rest of that visit, and Curve's expression had settled into something I was slowly learning to identify as reluctant reassessment. That evening after my watch ended, I was sitting in the human personnel quarters eating a meal that tasted like it had been designed by committee, and thinking about nothing in particular, when Ned dropped into the seat across from me and said without greeting, "Vance, I need you to tell me something." "Sure," I said. "Are you actively trying to get the Empress's attention, or is it just happening to you?" I looked at him. "It's just happening to me, right?" Ned said. He pushed his food around his plate. "Because Marshal Keth has been asking questions about your posting, about your watch assignments, about the gallery schedule." Marshal Keth was the highest-ranking Kelvari military officer on Ring 2, ranking above Sean in the command structure and reporting directly to the Imperial Council. He was tall even by Kelhari standards, with a close-cropped silver markings at his temples that indicated old blood and older rank, and he had looked at me exactly once since my arrival, in a way that suggested he had already made his conclusions and found them uninteresting. The fact that he was now asking questions about my schedule meant that someone had brought my existence to his attention, and the only reason someone would bring a junior human guard to the attention of a Kalari marshal was if that human guard had somehow become relevant to something the marshal cared about protecting. "I haven't done anything," I said. "I know you haven't." Ned said that might be the problem. I thought about that for a long time after Ned left. I thought about the Empress stopping in the gallery. I thought about the laugh she had almost not let herself make. I thought about the word Peric in her careful galactic standard, turned over like something she was deciding whether to keep. I was not naive about what was happening. I was not reading the situation incorrectly. What I was doing was refusing to follow the thought to its logical conclusion, because the logical conclusion was the kind of thing that changed your life, and my life up to this point had been carefully arranged to change as little as possible. I had been scared moving through that maintenance corridor in the dark. I had been scared, and I had moved anyway, because the alternative was standing still while something bad happened, and I had never been able to do that. It wasn't courage. It was just the specific way my fear worked, which was outward instead of inward. But this was different. This was not a maintenance corridor. This was a gallery in the light in plain sight, and what was moving toward me was not an armed intruder. I was still in my own way more frightened of it. I lay in my bunk that night, listening to the station hum, and thinking about a Marvel headdress in a display case, and a general who won every battle, and whether the human distinction between a cautionary tale and a celebration was really a difference in values, or just a difference in how comfortable a culture was with the cost of things. I didn't reach a conclusion, but somewhere in the middle of the night, I stopped trying to be invisible. Not loudly, not in any way anyone would have noticed. I just stopped planning my days around the specific goal of being unremarkable. It was a small change in intention. Sometimes small changes in intention are the ones that rearrange everything. The next morning, I took my post at the gallery junction at 6:55 and stood correctly and waited. At 7:04, I heard footsteps from the residential end of the corridor. I stood straight. I kept my eyes forward. I did not try to be invisible. She came through the gallery at her usual pace and passed the junction, and this time for just a moment as she passed. She looked at me directly, and without the slight angle she usually kept just for a second. Amber eyes in a corridor of violet light. She did not speak. She did not slow down. But that morning, for the first time, I noticed that she was wearing a very small Marvel silver pin on the left shoulder of her formal coat, the kind that was not part of any official insignia, the kind that no protocol manual had a category for. It was in the shape of a headdress. I stood at the junction for the rest of my watch and said nothing about it to anyone, but I was smiling very quietly, in a way that had nothing to do with trying, and everything to do with something I didn't have a word for yet. Outside, through the station's observation panels, the stars didn't move. They never did. But for the first time since I had arrived on Ring 2, the cold of the station felt like something I might eventually get used to. The second breach came on a night when I was not supposed to be on duty. I want to be precise about that, because it matters I was off duty. My shift had ended at 1800. I had eaten, filed my daily log, and gone back to the human personnel quarters, where I had been sitting with a mug of station coffee, trying to read a novel on my datapad. The novel was about two people on a distant colony who kept almost having an honest conversation, and then not having it. I was finding it very relatable. At 22:43 station time, the power died in my section. Not a flicker, not a partial. A complete cut, top to bottom, every light and every terminal and every status panel going dark simultaneously. Followed 2 seconds later by the emergency backup systems coming online in a pale amber glow that turned the corridor outside my door into something that looked like the inside of a warning. I was on my feet before I was fully awake, which is a reflex you develop after enough posts in places where things go wrong at night. The intercom was silent. That was the part that mattered. In a routine power failure, the intercom come back online with the backups. Ours hadn't, which meant either the intercom system had its own separate failure, which was statistically unlikely, or someone had cut it deliberately. I put on my jacket, holstered my sidearm, and opened my door. The corridor was empty except for Ned Finch, who was already in the hallway looking the same direction I was looking, which was toward the main junction that connected the human quarters to the rest of Ring 2. "Intercom," he said. Not a question. "Yes," I said. "3 sections dark," he said. I checked from the window. Gallery, council approach, and residential approach. Someone knows the station layout. They knew it last time, I said. Or they had someone who did. Ned looked at me in the amber emergency light. His face was very clear. We had worked together long enough by this point that we had developed the ability to have a full conversation in about 4 words. "Velen's people are at the formal stations," he said. "Protocol positions, not the maintenance connections," I said. "No." "Does Hobbs know about the intercom cut?" "Hobbs is on a secured channel, trying to reach the council wing. He's been trying for 6 minutes. 6 minutes in a real emergency, on a station with a functioning response system. 6 minutes is an enormous amount of time. It is long enough for almost anything to complete. I'm going to the gallery corridor," Ned nodded. "I'll go to the secondary access at level 4 and try to reach the power control station. If I can restore the intercom, Vulcan gets real information instead of protocol positions." "Good," I said. "Vance," he paused. "The residential quarter is full lockdown. Full means sealed outer doors. Inner guard active. Emergency codes required for entry. Even Velian needs 2 clearance confirmations to get inside." "I know." "Oh." I said the gallery connects to the residential quarter through an internal access panel on the south wall. Maintenance panel 16 seat. It's not on the formal floor plan. I looked at him. "How do you know about 16 seat?" "Because you're not the only one who memorizes floor plans when nervous," Ned said. And then he was already moving toward level 4. I went to the gallery. The amber emergency lighting made the display cases look like they were full of things waiting to be remembered. I moved fast and quiet, staying to the left wall, sidearm drawn, checking each junction before I cleared it. The gallery was empty. The council approach corridor at the far end was empty. Everything was too quiet in the wrong way. The way that means the noise is somewhere else and moving. I reached the south wall of the gallery and found panel 16C, where Ned had said it would be behind a display case that held a collection of navigation instruments from a pre-expansion species. The panel required a standard maintenance code, not a security clearance. This was the kind of oversight that got discovered during audits and fixed, and then recreated during the next renovation, when someone optimized access time instead of security. I entered the maintenance code from my standard issue wrist panel. The panel opened. The internal passage beyond was narrower than the utility corridor from the first breach. It ran about 20 meters and connected to a sealed door with a keypad. The keypad status light was green. It had already been unlocked from the other side. That was where my pulse went from fast to very fast. I went through the door. The residential quarter of Ring 2 was a different kind of architecture from the rest of the station. The corridors were wider. The ceilings were higher. There were no display cases here. No artifacts, just clean, pale walls, and the kind of absolute quiet that is maintained by design. Every surface absorbed sound. Every fixture was calibrated to be unobtrusive. It was a space built to feel like nothing was happening, which made anything that was happening stand out with unusual clarity. What was happening was a Kulvahari inner guard officer, one of Velen's people lying unconscious in the corridor 14 meters ahead of me. He was breathing. I could see that from where I was. He had been hit with something that had left a faint burn mark on the back of his shoulder, a suppression field, the kind used for non-lethal neutralization. Whatever they were using, They were trying to move quietly through this wing, without leaving bodies. That told me the primary target was alive, and they needed it to stay that way. I moved to the unconscious guard and took his position behind a corridor pillar. His radio was on his belt and still active. I keyed it softly. This is Vance Human Guard Gallery Sector. I am inside the residential quarter through Maintenance Access 16C. One inner guard down in Residential Corridor 3. I need Velen's location and the Empress's current position static, then a voice Tenson clipped, that I recognized as one of secondary commanders. Human. The Lord Commander is at the formal main entry. The Empress was moved to the secure room on order. At 2250. How did you enter the quarter? Maintain access, I said. The panel was already unlocked from inside. Someone with internal access was already in here. A silence. Then the secure room is Corridor 7. Deep interior. If they have internal access and know the protocol positions. They already know which rooms are secure. I said yes. I didn't wait for a response. I was already moving. Corridor 7 in the deep interior of the residential quarter was about 140 meters from my current position. I had the floor plan in my head, but not in my hands. I was working from memory, and the memory was from a single session with the station blueprints that I had accessed 3 weeks ago out of habit. I took 3 turns, passed 2 more empty corridors, and came to a junction where I heard something ahead. Voices, low, efficient, professional. 2 people, possibly 3, with the specific tone of people executing a plan rather than improvising one. They were on the other side of the junction around the corner, between me and Corridor 7. I stopped. I did not go around the corner. I pressed flat against the wall and controlled my breathing, and thought about the situation with the specific and unglamorous clarity that fear and necessity tend to produce. They were expecting the inner guard to come from the main entry side. Velen's protocol response was going to approach from the formal corridors. They had positioned themselves to handle that approach. What they were not expecting was one person coming from the gallery direction through an access panel they thought they had secured. I looked at the wall on my right. There was a door, a service door, the kind that opens into a utility space behind the wall panels used by maintenance crews for running conduit and checking systems. It had a standard latch, not a coded lock. I opened it, moved inside. The space beyond was dark and narrow, about 1 meter wide, running parallel to the main corridor. There were cable runs and pipe joints, and the kind of tight, uncomfortable darkness that is very useful if what you want to do is move 30 meters without being seen. And I moved through it sideways, slowly placing each step before I committed weight to it. The sounds from the corridor beyond the wall grew closer, and then passed, and then faded behind me. I counted the meters, 20, 25, 30. I found the next service door by touch, a simple latch on the inside. I eased it open by a centimeter, and looked through. Corridor 7 was directly ahead. 12 meters away, there was a sealed door with a manual lock, the kind that does not have an electronic override. In front of that door stood 2 Kelpari inner guards, both awake, both armed, both at precisely the wrong angle to see the service door I had just opened. They were guarding the door from the direction of the main approach, not from behind them. I opened the service door fully and moved into the corridor. Inner guard, I said loudly enough to cut through their focus. Both of them spun. I had my identification out in my left hand, and my sidearm down at my side, and I was speaking fast and very, before either of them could process the arrival of a human guard from a direction that made no tactical sense. The approach team has been bypassed. I came through the gallery access. The threat is between you and the main entry in the junction corridor. 2 to 3 persons. They are expecting Velen's approach, not a lateral movement. If you leave this door to engage them, the door is unguarded. If you stay, the approach team reaches the junction unchallenged. Both guards looked at me, then at each other. The older one, a senior by the weight of his insignia, made the calculation that he needed to make. You human, he said, pointing at me. Stay at this door. With my back to an unlocked access panel, I already came through. I said, yes, I understand the irony. He didn't wait to understand what irony meant in context. He and the second guard moved toward the junction corridor at the direct coordinated pace of people who know exactly what they're doing. I stood in front of the sealed door to the secure room and listened to the sounds of a controlled engagement happening around the corner, and thought about how I was a 26-year-old with a slightly above-average facility for languages, and a habit of memorizing floor plans, standing between an alien Empress and whatever came next. The engagement was brief and professional. 3 minutes of precise contained noise, followed by silence, and then the sound of movement returning down Corridor 7. Velen himself came around the corner. 3 of his inner guard behind him, 2 with a secured detainee between them. He looked at me standing in front of the door. He stopped. "You are here again," he said. "Yes, sir," I said. He looked at the service door, still standing open behind me. He looked at the main corridor. He put together the geometry of it without asking me to explain. "The secure room," he said. "Secure, sir. As far as I can confirm, the door hasn't been touched." He went to the door himself and spoke the Empress's protocol name in the formal address. A pause. Then from inside, the voice of her senior attendant, Kurth, tightly controlled. Lord Commander confirmed how many are secured. All 3, Velshan said. "Stand by." The door opened. Kurth came out first because that was protocol, checking the corridor before the Empress moved. Then the second attendant, then her. She was wearing a formal sleep robe in the deep crimson of the imperial house, not court clothes, and her hair, which was always precisely arranged in public, was loose around her shoulders. She looked entirely composed in the way that people look entirely composed when the composure is real and not performed, when they have made peace with fear rather than hidden it. She looked at Velenon and exchanged the formal words of confirmation and status. She looked at the detainees. She looked at her 2 inner guards, and then she looked at me. I was standing slightly behind Velenon and to the left. I was doing my best to be appropriately invisible, which was becoming my default setting, when her gaze moved through a room. "This human," she said, not a question. Velian didn't treat it like one. "Vance," he said, "Human Guard Gallery Sector." He entered through the maintenance access and established position at the secure room door, while my guards cleared the approach threat. She looked at me for a long moment. Her attendants were quiet. The guards were quiet. The station hummed its constant background note. "Vance," she said. It was the first time she had used my name. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. "Eminence," I said. She said in Vihari, using a formal construction that I recognized as the register used between equals in very old Kalari writing. "You are either very brave or you do not fully understand your own situation." I thought about this honestly. "Both, Eminence," I said in roughly equal measure. Something crossed her expression. I had seen it once before in the gallery, when she had almost let herself laugh. This time it stayed a moment longer. Then Kurth was at her elbow, and the formal movement protocols were reasserting themselves, and she was being guided back toward the inner suite, where the security sweep would take hours to complete. But at the last moment, just before she moved around the corner, she looked back, not at Velen, not at the guards, at me, she said in quiet Vihari. At a register so informal it had no official place in any protocol manual. "You are hurt." I looked down. There was blood on my left sleeve, from where I had misjudged the width of the service passage, and caught my arm on a cable bracket in the dark. I had not noticed it. "It's minor." "It is not minor," she said, with the specific precision of someone who has read enough medical protocol to know what minor means. "Kurth, have the station medic come to the inner suite. Bring him." Kurt looked at Velshan. Velian looked at me. I looked at the blood on my sleeve and thought about how this was the second time in a month that the phrase "bring him" in relation to my person had appeared in the same sentence as the Empress's private quarters, and how completely different the contexts were, and how somehow the second version was the one that was harder to process. "Sir," I said to Velshan, "go." Velshan said there was something in the word, not warmth, not approval, but the very specific tone of a person who has revised their assessment of a situation, is choosing for now not to announce the revision aloud. I went. The medic arrived while Kurth was overseeing a preliminary security sweep of inner suite. He bandaged my arm with quick professional efficiency and made no comment about my presence in a room that human guards had not historically been invited into. He was Keelhari and experienced, and had clearly developed the same pragmatic relationship with unexpected circumstances that long service tends to produce. The Empress was across the suite, in conversation with Sean about the breach details. She was not looking at me, but at one point, while the medic was finishing the bandage, she paused mid-sentence and glanced over briefly. The way you glance at something you were already thinking about, she was thinking about what she had said to me. I could tell. Not regretting it, exactly. Weighing it. turning it in her mind. The thing she had said was in the informal register, the register that Kelhari emperors and empresses did not use to guards, the register that meant, in a way, that all the layers of formal protocol could not quite cover. That she was not looking at me as a guard in that moment. I was thinking about that too. I was thinking about it while the medic packed up, while Curved escorted me back to the gallery access, with formal courtesy that felt somehow less formal than usual, while I made my way back through the maintenance panel and stood in the gallery alone. Display cases around me in the amber emergency light that was still running because the power was still not fully restored. I was thinking about it when the intercom crackled back online and Ned's voice came through on the guard channel saying, "Power restored. Vance, you alive?" And I said yes, and he said anything exciting. And I said the usual, and I could hear him deciding not to ask what that meant. I stood in the gallery for a few minutes before returning to quarters. The station outside was doing what stations do, cycling, processing, maintaining itself. The breach teams were in custody. The formal reports would take days to complete. By morning, there would be notifications across the compact, a security review, a round of diplomatic communications about what it meant that the Empress had been targeted for the second time in a month. None of that was what I was thinking about. I was thinking about two words in an old register in a corridor lit by emergency amber, spoken by someone who had the entire Kelvari Empire at her disposal, and had looked at a bleeding junior human guard and said something that wasn't in any protocol. "You are hurt." I went back to my quarters. I did not finish the novel. The two people in it were still almost having an honest conversation, and I had lost patience with the almost outside the station. The stars were the same as always, cold and indifferent, and very far away, but the distance felt in some technical and unverifiable way, slightly less than it had that morning. Marshal Keith summoned me the morning after the second breach, not to his office, to the formal address chamber on level 3, which was a room designed specifically for conversations that needed to be conducted in the presence of rank. The ceilings were 20 feet high. The chairs were made from something dark and old, and the proportions of the table were like everything else in the building. Exactly wrong for a human body. I sat in the chair across from him and tried to look like I was comfortable, which I was not. Keith was the kind of person who had built himself into furniture. He had the still permanent quality of something that had been placed in a room a very long time ago and was not going anywhere. His uniform had no visible creases. His silver temple markings were the deep, true silver of a family line that predated most of the political structures currently governing the compact. He had the eyes of someone who had watched a large number of situations develop from positions of complete control, and he looked at me with those eyes now, unhurried, the way a person looks at a problem they have already solved and are reviewing for errors. "Vance," he said in Galactic Standard. He did not offer a formal address because I was not entitled to one. "I have reviewed both incident reports." "Yes, sir," I said. "In each incident, you were present in a location you were not formally assigned to, took action outside your authorized scope, and achieved an outcome that the assigned response units did not." "Yes, sir. I want to be precise with you," Keth said. "The compact's formal position is that your actions in both incidents were commendable. The station's official record will reflect that. You will receive a citation." He paused. "I am not the compact's formal position." I waited. "You are a junior human guard," Keth said. "You have been on this station for 6 weeks. In those 6 weeks, you have twice entered the Imperial residential quarter through unauthorized means, twice been in close proximity to the Empress's person, and have had 3 documented interactions with her in the gallery corridor." He paused again. "These are facts, not interpretations. The interpretations are mine to make." I understood what he was saying. He was saying it very cleanly. I said, "I have not sought any of these situations. The incidents were genuine emergencies. They were genuine emergencies in which you were present." Keth said, "The question is not whether the emergencies were genuine. The question is why a junior human guard is consistently present at emergencies involving the Empress, when experienced inner guard personnel are not." He looked at me steadily. "I am going to explain something to you that your orientation materials did not cover, because your orientation materials were written for guards assigned to outer sector postings, not residential quarter adjacency." I said nothing. "The Empress has held her position for 31 years. Keith said. "In those 31 years, 17 members of the Imperial Court have attempted formal alliances with the Imperial House through proximity strategies. 14 of those 17 were from established Kelavari families with centuries of precedent. All 17 were removed from proximity. 3 were formally censured. 1 was exiled. He paused. I am describing a pattern. The pattern exists because the imperial house cannot be approached through informal proximity. It can only be approached through the formal structures that exist for that purpose. This protects the integrity of the house. It also protects the individuals in question because the alternative is considerably less comfortable than removal. He was looking at me very carefully. I am not pursuing any alliance, I said. And even as I said it, I was aware of how thoroughly inadequate the sentence was for what it was trying to do. I know you are not, Keth said. What I am telling you is that the appearance of pursuit carries consequences equivalent to the pursuit itself in Kelavari institutional culture and the appearance Vance currently exists. He folded his hands on the table. I am not telling you this to threaten you. I am telling you this to give you information that your superiors have not provided. You are an intelligent person who makes good decisions in difficult situations. I would prefer that you make a good decision now in a situation that is not yet difficult. I sat with that for a moment. What is the good decision, sir? I asked. Request a transfer, Keth said, to any posting of your choosing within the Compact's Human Diplomatic Corps. I will personally approve the request and annotate your record favorably. You leave Ring 2 in a positive position. The current situation resolves without requiring formal action. He paused. This is a generous offer. I want you to know that I am aware it is generous. He was right that it was generous. He was also right that it was an offer with a shape, and the shape told me something about how seriously he was taking the situation. A marshal of Keth's rank did not personally approve transfer requests for junior guards, unless the junior guard had become a problem he wanted solved. Quietly, the issue was that what he was describing as a problem from where I was sitting felt like the most alive I had ever been in my professional life, and I could not say that, and I could not act on it in any way that would justify his concern, and I could not request a transfer, because requesting a transfer meant deciding that the thing happening in the gallery corridor was something I was going to walk away from, and I had tried to stop doing things I was going to regret, and this felt distinctly like that category. Sir, I said carefully, I appreciate the offer, and I understand the concern. I would like to request 24 hours to consider before responding. Keith looked at me for a long moment. 24 hours, he said. Yes, sir. He nodded once. 24 hours. I left the formal address chamber and walked back to the gallery sector and took my post and stood at the junction and thought about transfer. Requests for about 4 minutes before the door at the residential end of the corridor opened, and Curve came through. Kerr had been the Empress's senior attendant for 12 years. In that time, he had developed a face that could hold 3 different communications simultaneously and deliver the right one at the right moment with precision timing. This morning his face said formal business, with a secondary layer underneath it that I was slowly learning to read, and the secondary layer said something like, cautiously optimistic, which was not an expression I expected from a Kalahari senior attendant in any context. The Empress requests your attendance in the private garden, Kerr said, at your convenience following your current watch. My watch ended at 1200. I was careful not to look at my wrist panel to check the time. I will attend at the end of my watch, I said. Curve nodded. The garden entrance is at Corridor 4 residential sector. I will be waiting. He went back through the door. I stood at the junction. A maintenance drone passed through the far end of the gallery. The display cases were the same as always. The Marvel headdress was in its case. I thought about Keth's offer. Then I thought about the small silver pin on the left shoulder of a formal coat. Then I stopped thinking about Kath's offer. The private garden was the one room in Ring 2 that didn't feel like a room. It had been built inside a sealed observation dome at the residential sector's inner edge, and through the transparent ceiling, you could see the full arc of the station's orbital track, the edge of a gas giant in dark amber, a scatter of asteroids far enough away to look decorative, the permanent pale blue of the nearby stars, light diffused through the dome's filtration, panels on the floor. Actual soil had been brought from at least 3 different planets. Things grew in it. Trees that didn't exist anywhere outside this room, with bark that shifted color depending on the hour, and low plants with wide flat leaves that the station's air system used for processings. And that had been chosen, I suspected, not for utility, but for what they looked like. She was standing with her back to the door when Kurth brought me in. She was looking up through the dome at the gas giant. Kurft withdrew without a word and closed the door. And for a moment, I was simply standing in a garden that shouldn't exist inside a space station in front of a woman who governed a significant portion of the known galaxy, trying to figure out the correct protocol for a situation that did not have one. She spoke first. "Marish like Keth, met with you this morning," she said, still not facing me. A statement, not a question, which meant she already knew. "Yes, Eminence," I said. "He offered you a transfer." "Yes, Eminence." She turned that. She was not in court clothes. She was wearing something simpler in dark blue, and she looked less like the eternal flame and more like a person, a very specific person, standing in a garden she had built inside a station. Because she had decided she wanted something that grew, she looked at me with those amber eyes, and I stood correctly and waited. "Did you accept?" she said. "No, Eminence." I asked for 24 hours to consider. She looked at me for a long moment. Why? This was the question. This was the exact and specific question I had known was coming since Kurft had delivered the invitation. I had spent the remainder of my watch thinking about how to answer it. I had concluded that there was no version of the true answer that could be safely up in protocol language, and that attempting to dress it up would be worse than saying it directly, and that saying it directly would be either the best or the worst decision I had made on this station, and that the distinction between those two outcomes was something I could not control from my side of the conversation, because I didn't want to leave without knowing if there was a reason to stay. I said, and I couldn't know that without being honest. And being honest meant coming here first. The garden was very quiet. Somewhere in the soil, something was growing that didn't have a name I knew. She said in the informal register, the one with no protocol category. "No one has ever been honest with me first." "Before what?" I asked. "Before any of the things that come after honesty," she said. "The formal language, the correct gestures, the careful distance." She looked up at the dome for a moment. "There are 27 formal procedures for requesting proximity to the Imperial House. I have memorized all of them. I know them because people use them. I know them because before anyone in this court speaks to me directly, they have already thought about which procedure applies." She looked back at me. "You don't know any of the procedures." "I know 2 of them," I said. I stopped reading after the 3rd page. That sound again. Quiet. Quick. Barely there. But real. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Not in any protocol register. In whatever this is," she gestured slightly between us. "Whatever this register is called, where I'm from," I said. "We call it talking," she said. She considered the word the way she had considered Payek turning it. "In talking, then I have been the Empress of the Kelvari house since I was 22 years old. I was not raised for it. My predecessor chose me because of my capability and my bloodline, and because the 3 individuals ahead of me in succession had all demonstrated the particular kind of ambition that makes bad rulers. I was chosen because I was not ambitious." She paused. "I am also, as a result, alone in a way that has no formal category. The court has language for loneliness. It is called composure. As long as I demonstrate composure, the loneliness is categorized as dignity." Her voice did not waver. "I find this exhausting." I said nothing for a moment. Then I said, "That is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in 6 weeks. This posting has not been good for your supply of honesty." She said, "The posting has actually been quite interesting." I said, "It's mostly the last 10 minutes that are surprising." She looked at me steadily. "You secured that passage the first night because you noticed something that trained guards did not. You came through the service door the second time because you had memorized a layout that security officers did not review. You understood the Marvel headdress. You answered in the correct courtly register on the first try." She tilted her head slightly. "You are not what you appear to be." "I'm exactly what I appear to be," I said. "I just appear quiet." "Yes," she said. "That is the part that is confusing everyone." She said it with the faint dry edge that I was beginning to recognize as the version of humor she allowed herself when no one was performing for an audience. "Keith thinks you are being strategic. Keth is a person who has spent 30 years in a room where everyone is strategic," I said. "It affects your ability to imagine alternatives." She was quiet for a moment. "What should I tell Keth?" she asked. The question landed between us with a weight that neither of us pretended not to feel. "I think that's something only you can decide," I said. "I can tell you what I want, but what you do with Keth isn't about what I want. It's about what you're willing to let be different. She looked at me for a long time. The light through the dome shifted as the station moved along its track. And for a moment, the amber of the gas giant caught the edge of her face and made her look the way things look when they have been standing in the same place for a very long time and have just decided to move. I have never done anything because I wanted to, she said. Everything has been because it was correct, because it was necessary, because the house required it. She paused. I am tired of necessary. For what it's worth, I said, most humans do things because they want to fairly regularly. It doesn't always work out, but it tends to produce a more interesting life, does it? She said, broadly speaking. And if I do something because I want to, she said, and Keith files a formal grievance with the Compact Council, and the Council takes it up as a question of imperial conduct, and 17 member species send their representatives to weigh in on a kell of Empress's personal choices. Then you stand in front of all of them, I said, and you tell them why you made the choice. Not in protocol language, just the truth. I paused. People find it very difficult to argue with the truth. Not because it stops them, it doesn't, but because it puts them on the wrong side of the argument from the beginning. She looked at the dome again. The gas giant was moving out of the primary view arc slowly. The star's pale blue was getting stronger. I need to think, she said. I think clearly in here. The garden is the only place on this station where no one is watching. I can leave, I said. No, she said. Stay. Think quietly for a moment. I find this. She paused, selecting the word useful, the quiet company. So, I stayed. I stood a few meters away from her and looked up at the dome and thought about Keth and transfer requests and protocol manuals and what it felt like to be in a room where the other person was not performing anything. It felt, I decided, like the space between words in a language you were just starting to understand, not yet fluent, but past the point of confusion. We stood in the garden for about 20 minutes. She did not speak, and I did not speak, and the silence was the comfortable kind, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Then, Kerr's voice came softly through the door. Eminence. The council session begins in 30 minutes. She straightened. The composure that the court called dignity settled back into place, the way weather changes gradually, and then, all at once. She turned toward the door, but before she moved, she said in the informal register quietly, Vance Eminence, do not request the transfer. It was the smallest possible instruction. It had the weight of something with a very long future in it. Yes, Eminence, I said. She went to the council session. I went back to the gallery. I stood at the junction for the rest of the afternoon and thought about a garden inside, a station, and a woman who had built it because she wanted something that grew. At 1800 station time, Marshal Keth sent a formal notification to my wrist panel. It said that the 24-hour consideration period had been logged and that his offer remained open pending my response. I composed a very short reply. He had said with respect and appreciation for the Marshal's consideration that I would not be requesting a transfer at this time. I sent it. Then I stood at my post and watched the gallery and waited for the next morning. Outside, the stars had not moved, but I was beginning to think that distance was mostly a question of what you decided to do about it. The summons came 4 days later, not from the Empress, not from Sean. It came from the Compact's diplomatic registry on behalf of Marshal Keth's office, delivered as an official tribunal notice to Lieutenant Colonel Hobbs, who called me into his office at 7 in the morning and put it on his desk between us, and looked at it for a moment before looking at me. It's a formal grievance, Hobbs said, filed under Article 19 of the Compact's Cross-Species Diplomatic Conduct Code. The specific charge is compromised imperial dignity through a pattern of unauthorized proximity. He paused. Keth filed it directly with the council, rather than going through station channels. I looked at the document. It was 12 pages. The formatting was precise. Keith had been building this for days. Who else knows? I asked. The council notification went out last night, 6 hours ago. Hobbs rubbed the back of his neck. There are already 14 diplomatic channels requesting clarification of the Compact's position on human guards in Kalari residential postings. One of them is from the Marvel Confederation, 2 are from the Dari, who have historically opposed any human expansion in this sector. He looked at me. Vance, this is not a small piece of paper. No, sir, I said. The tribunal is in 3 days. It will be conducted in the formal assembly chamber on Ring 1, which holds approximately 400 observers. K has already submitted his evidence package, which includes the station surveillance records from both breach incidents, your gallery interaction logs, the gallery schedule change documentation, and he paused looking at the page, an unofficial record of a private meeting in the Imperial Garden. I went very still. The garden was the only place on the station where no one was watching. She had said that she had believed it. Keth had apparently decided that belief required testing. Is the surveillance of the private garden legal under Compact Code? I asked. It's a gray area, Hobbs said. The garden is inside the residential quarter, which is technically Imperial private space, but the station's structural monitoring systems have a standing authorization for full coverage of any area used by Imperial family members during a security review period. The second breach triggered a 30-day security review. Key filed the surveillance during the review window. Hobbs paused. He was careful. He is always careful. I sat in Hobbs's office for a moment and thought about the garden, about the dome, about 20 minutes of quiet company, and a very small instruction delivered in a register that had no protocol category. Do not request the transfer. She hadn't known the garden was being watched. She had been honest in a place she believed was safe. Sir, I said, I need to send a communication. To whom? To Curve the Empress's senior attendant. Hobbs looked at me. Vance, the Compact's position in this tribunal is going to be complicated. If you have any contact with the Imperial household before the hearing, I know, I said. I need to tell her what Keth used. She doesn't know the garden was surveilled. Hobbs was quiet for a moment. Then he said quietly, That's a decent thing to do. It's the minimum decent thing, I said. Can I use your secured terminal? He turned the terminal toward me. I sent a short message to Kurif through the formal attendant channel. It said only that the Compact surveillance records from the 30-day review period had been entered into a formal grievance proceeding, and that all conversations recorded during that period would be part of the tribunal evidence package. I used formal Vihari. I kept it factual. I did not add anything personal. I sent it and went back to my quarters and waited. The next 2 days were the longest I had spent on Ring 2, which was competing against several other very long experiences. Ned gave me the kind of steady, uncomplicated company that I had come to understand was his primary way of expressing concern. He talked about inconsequential things. He brought meals. He did not ask questions that I could not answer. I appreciated all of it more than I said. Keth's formal position, as circulated in the diplomatic channels, was precise, and from a certain angle, entirely reasonable. It held that a junior human guard had, through a series of coincidences that were individually defensible, but collectively constituted a pattern, inserted himself into the proximity of the Empress in a manner that violated the established protocols for cross-species diplomatic conduct. It further held that the Compact's failure to address this pattern reflected a broader lack of appropriate deference to Kivari institutional norms by human diplomatic personnel. It concluded with a recommendation that human guards be prohibited from residential quarter adjacency postings on all Kelavari stations, and that existing postings be reviewed for compliance. What Keth had done was take a specific situation and make it general. He was not on the surface arguing about me. He was arguing about a policy. This was elegant. It meant the tribunal was not about whether I had done something wrong. It was about whether my presence was inherently inappropriate, which was a much larger and much harder argument to defeat on the merits. Hobbs told me this late in the second evening. He had been reviewing compact law for hours, and he looked like a man who had been reading small text in poor light. He's framed it so the tribunal isn't judging your conduct. Hobbs said he's asking the council to judge the policy. If they rule on the policy, your conduct becomes irrelevant. You're removed not because you did something wrong, but because the rule changes. Can the Empress speak at the tribunal? I asked. Hobbs looked at me. The Empress can attend as the affected party. She can provide a formal statement. But the Kelavari rules of address in a compact tribunal mean she has to speak through a designated representative unless she invokes Imperial direct address, which he stopped. A what? I said it's a ceremonial act. Hobbs said slowly. It hasn't been used in 40 years. It's called the direct voice. When an imperial ruler invokes it, they speak without representation, without protocol structure, directly to the assembled body. It supersedes compact procedural rules for the duration of the address. He paused. It also means everything they say is entered permanently into the public compact record. No edits, no formal language filter. Whatever they say, exactly as they say it becomes part of the official history. I thought about the garden. I thought about the informal register. I thought about a woman who had said in words that were now in a surveillance record that she was tired of necessary. Is there any possibility she invokes it? Hobbs asked. I genuinely don't know, I said, which was true, and also not the whole truth. The whole truth was that I had spent 2 days thinking about the question of what she would decide to let be different, and I had concluded that I had no ability to predict the answer, because she was the most genuinely surprising person I had encountered in my professional life. And in my experience, surprising people tended to be surprising consistently. The tribunal chamber on Ring 1 held 412 observers. I know this because I counted them. I was sitting at the respondent's position at the front of the chamber, which was a chair on a raised platform that faced the council panel, and also faced the observer gallery, which meant 412 people from 11 species were looking at me with various degrees of interest, skepticism, and what I can only describe as anthropological curiosity. The council panel was 7 members of hairy and compact mixed. Key sat at the formal petitioner's position to my left. Hobbs sat at the respondent's counsel position to my right. He had spent the previous evening helping me prepare a statement in Vajari and had reviewed the legal framework for the 4th time. His expression this morning was the expression of a man who had done everything he could and was now in the hands of variables. Key presented first. His presentation was 40 minutes long, and it was the most effective piece of legal argument I had ever heard in a governmental setting. It was clear, it was structured, and every single piece of evidence was legitimate. The gallery schedule changes demonstrated statistically. The interaction logs quoted directly. The surveillance records from both breach incidents presented as a timeline, and then carefully, the garden surveillance. He did not quote it in full. He simply noted that the record existed and that it had been obtained legally within the 30-day review window, and that its contents confirmed a pattern of informal address between the respondent and the Empress that had no precedent in compact Kelavari diplomatic history. He did not play it. He did not need to. The council panel's lead member, a Kelavari senior official named Lorath, who had the patience of someone who had sat on 100 of these and expected this one to last about as long, asked Keth whether he was alleging misconduct by the respondent. Keth said it precisely. The marshal's petition does not allege misconduct. It alleges unsuitability of category. The respondent behaved according to his nature and his training. It is the placement, not the behavior, that the marshal contends is inappropriate. Lamouth turned to me. Does the respondent have a statement? I had prepared a statement. It was 8 paragraphs informal Vahari, reviewed by Hobbs, accurate and appropriate, and almost completely inadequate for the moment. I looked at it on the datapad in my hand. I thought about adequacy. I put the datapad down. The respondent does, I said in Vahari, in the formal register. The respondent acknowledges that every document Marshal Keth has presented is accurate. The schedule changes occurred. The interactions occurred. The maintenance accesses occurred. The garden conversation occurred. I paused. The respondent asks the council to consider one additional fact which is not in the documentary record, which is this. Both breaches would have succeeded if I had not been where I was. Not because I was strategically placed, because I memorize floor plans when I am nervous. And I was nervous from my first day on this station. And the maintenance passages I used were things I had learned out of anxious habit and not tactical planning. The chamber was very quiet. Marish, like Keth, has described a pattern. I said, I want to suggest a different description of the same facts. A human guard who was assigned to a posting outside his comfort zone paid very close attention to his surroundings. He learned a language because he found it difficult. He memorized infrastructure because it calmed him. And when emergencies happened, the things he had learned out of nervousness turned out to be exactly what was needed. I looked at the panel. The marshal's proposed policy would remove human guards from residential adjacency postings because we are too informal, too improvisational, too prone to operating outside the standard response framework. I would ask the council whether on the 2 occasions it was tested that quality was a liability or a resource. Lomath was looking at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. The respondent's statement noted the garden surveillance record. He said, Does the respondent wish to address its contents? No, I said. The respondent does not believe that a private conversation should be the basis of a professional determination. What was said in that room belongs to the person who said it. It's not mine to characterize or defend. The chamber went quiet again. From the observer gallery, I could feel 400 pairs of eyes in various configurations, doing various kinds of thinking. Then from the formal entrance doors on the left side of the chamber came the kind of silence that precedes something significant. It is a specific silence, the silence of an audience that has collectively redirected its attention to a single point. And I felt it before I saw it. She walked in not with attendants, not in formal court array, alone in the deep crimson of the imperial house, with the composure that the court called dignity, worn the way she always wore it, not as a mask, but as something she carried, and occasionally chose to put down. She walked to the center of the chamber floor and stood, and the 400 observers went still in the way that water goes still when something very large enters it. Lurith said, in the careful tone of someone managing an unexpected development with professional grace. Eminence, the tribunal acknowledges the Empress's presence. Does the Imperial House wish to offer formal representation? No, she said in Galactic Standard, clear and direct, so that everyone in the chamber understood without translation. The Imperial House invokes the direct voice. The murmur that went through the observer gallery lasted about 4 seconds. I watched Lomith absorb the information. I watched the other council members absorb it. I watched Keth, from the petitioner's position, recalibrate something behind his controlled expression, with a speed that told me he had considered this possibility, and concluded it was unlikely. Lomith said, "The direct voice is invoked. The record is open, Eminence." She looked at the council panel for a moment, then she looked at the observer gallery, then very briefly, she looked at me. I held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds, which was no longer an accident. Then she turned back to the chamber. "I have governed the Kalari House for 31 years, she said. In those 31 years, every decision I have made has been made through formal structure, proper representation, and the appropriate protocol mechanisms. I have been composure when the court needed composure. I have been procedure when the compact needed procedure. I have been in every formal sense exactly what the position requires." She paused. "I am not using the direct voice today to defend a human guard's posting. I am using it to say something that is not in any protocol document." The chamber was completely still. Marish lied. Keith's petition identifies a pattern of informal interaction between a member of the Imperial House and a human guard. That pattern is real. It did not occur because the guard sought it. It occurred because the guard behaved consistently and without calculation, like a person rather than a position. He looked at things directly. He answered questions honestly. He said the word Pyrrhic in a corridor and meant it. Her voice was steady and clear. He secured 2 passages that trained inner guard personnel did not secure, not because he was more capable, but because he was paying attention in a way that people who have been trained in formal response patterns sometimes stop paying attention. He sat in the medical bay after the second breach and did not claim to be fine. He was hurt, and he said so. Someone in the observer gallery made a sound. She did not pause. The Marshal's petition proposes that human guards are unsuitable for residential adjacency because they operate outside formal framework. I am stating for the permanent compact record that on both occasions, when the formal framework was insufficient, this one human guard's willingness to operate outside it was the reason I was not harmed. She looked at the council panel directly. The compact talks extensively about cross-species cooperation. It has documents about it. It has ceremonies about it. What it has less of is examples. I am standing here using the direct voice in the permanent record to say that the example exists and that it is a human guard on Ring 2 who memorizes floor plans because he is nervous. She paused. The chamber absorbed this. 400 beings who had come to watch a policy debate were sitting in the presence of something that had taken a different shape. Keith's petition asks the council to categorize this guard as a problem of placement. She said, "I am telling the council that he is the chief of my Imperial Guard, effective from this moment, with full Kier standing under the authority of the direct voice." She looked at Keth briefly directly. "The standing is permanent. The record is open. This is what I want." The council panel had no procedural response for this. Lelmuth spent approximately 30 seconds in very productive silence before determining that the direct voice invocation superseded the tribunal's scope and that the petition as filed no longer had standing against the Empress's direct placement authority. Keith accepted this with the stillness of a man who had played a long game and discovered that the board had more dimensions than he had mapped. He did not argue. He was too experienced to argue a position with no ground left under it. What followed was formal and quick by tribunal standards. The petition was suspended, pending a review of the placement authority question, which Lelmuth noted was likely to be settled in the Empress's favor, given the clear precedent. The chamber began to dissolve into the specific loud quiet of 400 observers, all wanting to discuss what they had just witnessed. Hobbs looked at me. He had the expression of a man who had prepared for a difficult argument and discovered that the outcome had bypassed argument entirely. "Vance," he said, "you are now apparently the chief of the Imperial Guard." "I'm going to need a better uniform," I said. Hobbs stared at me. Then slowly, the exhaustion on his face shifted into something that was unmistakably a smile. "I will add it to the administrative list," he said. I found her afterwards in the corridor outside the chamber. She was speaking with Kurft in a low, efficient exchange that was clearly logistical and was wrapping up as I approached. Kurft looked at me. His expression had settled into the one I had finally learned to read accurately, which was respect without ceremony. The kind that was realer than any formal address he withdrew. She turned to me. "Eminence," I said. "That word is going to be complicated now," she said in the informal register, in the tone that had no protocol category. "Given that you technically report to me directly, I'll manage," I said. She looked at me for a moment outside through the observation panel at the end of the corridor. The gas giant was in full view, amber and enormous, and entirely indifferent to everything that had just happened in the chamber behind us. "I told the whole compact I was tired of necessary," she said. "You did," I said. "It's in the permanent record, it is." She was quiet for a moment. Was that the right decision? I thought about it honestly, the way she had taught me without performing the answer before I found it. "Yes," I said. "It was the first thing you did entirely because you wanted to, and it was the truest thing said in that chamber today." She looked at the gas giant. "I'm going to have to write 17 formal responses to the diplomatic channels that filed queries this morning." "Probably," I said. "And Keth will request a review of the placement authority president." "He will, and the Marvel Confederation will want a formal comment from the Imperial House on what this means for human Kelavari integration policy." "Yes, I said, and you'll give one, and it'll be clear and exactly right, because that's what you do. You're very good at it." She turned from the window and looked at me directly, amber eyes in the corridor light. She didn't say the words. I knew she wasn't going to say the words. Not today, not in any corridor with diplomatic channels still open, and the compact record cooling from what she had already put in it. But she had rearranged an entire tribunal. She had invoked an authority unused in 40 years. She had put herself in the permanent record, saying that she had wanted something. She had moved the stars around, so we'd have more time together. I figured that was close enough. "Chief of the Imperial Guard," she said, and there was something in the way she said it, something in the carefully controlled edge of the informal register that was not composure and was not dignity, and was, if I was reading it correctly, and by this point, I was fairly confident I was reading it correctly, something very close to joy. "I'm going to need a better uniform," I said again. "Curve will arrange it," she said. She walked back toward the residential quarter. I walked with her, not as a guard, not as a respondent, as a person who had decided not to be invisible. The corridor was the same as always. The violet height, the clean, pale walls, the proportions slightly wrong for a human body.